He sat in silence, hands cuffed in front of him, elbows resting on a scratched courtroom table. His jacket was torn, his hair messy from the scuffle the night before. No one looked twice. To them, he was just another stubborn old man hauled in for disturbing the peace. The arresting officers stood in the back, arms crossed, smirking like they'd done the world a favor. The judge flipped through his folder with bored indifference. No one knew his name. No one cared. Not yet. Until the back doors opened without warning and a four-star general in full-dress uniform stepped inside, his boots striking the floor like a drumbeat. Every head turned. The courtroom froze, and for the first time that morning, the man in cuffs finally looked up. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you think stories like this deserve to be heard, hit the subscribe button to support the channel. Walter Briggs lived alone at the edge of town in a single-story cabin half swallowed by trees. He kept to himself. No visitors, no phone, no internet, just an old truck, a porch that creaked under his boots, and a workshop filled with rusted tools and memories no one asked about. He wasn't unfriendly, just quiet. People who passed him in town sometimes nodded. He rarely nodded back. Most thought he was just another aging loner who never adjusted to civilian life. The truth was, he'd never tried. He'd served 31 years in the Navy, 17 of them as a SEAL sniper. Classified deployments across 5 continents, missions scrubbed from every record, but burned into his memory like brands. He never spoke of them, never accepted medals. When he retired, he refused the pension, declined the ceremony, and disappeared. Not out of bitterness, but because the war had taken enough. He didn't need applause. He needed silence. He spent his days repairing broken things, radios, tools, even old prosthetics for disabled vets who couldn't afford replacements. They paid him in firewood, canned food, or nothing at all. Walter never asked. He lived simply, deliberately. His only connection to the world was a battered flip phone held together with duct tape and used mostly as a flashlight. The trouble started on a Tuesday afternoon. He had driven into town to buy a pack of AA batteries and a part for a lawnmower a neighbor had asked him to fix. After paying in cash, he stepped outside the hardware store and sat on the curb near the sidewall where there was an outdoor outlet. His phone had died hours earlier, and he needed it to arrange a ride for a wheelchair-bound vet later that night. He plugged it in and waited. That's when the store manager approached, mid-30s, impatient, clipboard in hand. He didn't recognize Walter. Just saw an unshaven man in an old jacket sitting on the ground near his storefront. "I'm going to need you to move along, sir," the manager said. Walter didn't react. "Just charging my phone," he muttered. "You can't do that here. I'll be gone in 10 minutes. "That's not how this works. Get up now or I'm calling the cops." Walter didn't argue. He just looked at the man, calm, unshaken, and said, "Do what you need to." 15 minutes later, 2 officers arrived, young, confident, maybe a little bored. They saw the situation and made assumptions. One told Walter to stand up. He didn't, not out of defiance, but because his hip had been damaged years ago in a jump gone wrong. The officer grabbed his arm. Walter reflexively shifted his weight and brushed the hand aside, not violently, just instinctively. The second officer lunged in. 2 minutes later, Walter was on the ground, face pressed to concrete, arms twisted, cuffs clicking behind his back. None of them recognized the tattoo partially visible beneath the rolled cuff of his sleeve. None of them noticed the scar below his right ear, or the straight-back discipline of a man who had survived hell and never asked for a favor. To them, he was just another vagrant causing trouble. They hauled him into the squad car without reading his rights. He didn't protest. At the station, he gave a false name. Not to lie, just because his real one didn't matter anymore. He didn't need to be remembered. He didn't need their system. But systems, when pushed, don't always forget. And this time, someone was watching. The holding cell was small, cold, and smelled of bleach and concrete. Walter sat on the metal bench with his hand still cuffed in front of him. He hadn't spoken since being booked. He hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't made a phone call. The officers processing him didn't press the issue. They'd written him off as another delusional old man pretending to be tougher than he looked. At the front desk, one of the younger cops entered the arrest report. He didn't know how to categorize. Walter. No ID, no background match. The fingerprint scanner kept returning errors. Frustrated, the officer entered John Doe, possible homeless, and moved on. Walter's clothes were neatly folded in a plastic bag, his phone placed on the evidence shelf, still dead. Later that afternoon, he was escorted to the county courthouse, in a transport van shackled to a metal rail along with 2 men arrested for fighting behind a bar. When they arrived, he was marched inside, still cuffed, still silent. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. The courtroom was nearly empty aboard Bife. A city prosecutor flipping through a stack of minor infractions, a public defender who hadn't yet glanced at Walter's file. The judge, a man more used to traffic tickets than anything else, leaned back in his chair and sighed. The case was called. Walter was led to the defense table. The room didn't react. He looked like a man who barely knew where he was. The judge asked for his name. Walter said nothing. The public defender shrugged and asked for a brief recess to try to get clarity. The judge granted 5 minutes, clearly annoyed. In the back of the room, a clerk named Allen, 24 years old, Marine Reserve, second-generation military, watched with growing discomfort. Something about the old man's demeanor didn't fit the rest of the scene. Allen had seen his share of posturing, of stolen valor, of men who talked tough and wore fake medals, but this wasn't that. This man didn't talk at all. And that, more than anything, made Allen uneasy. As Walter shifted slightly to adjust his weight on the bench, his sleeve pulled back just enough to expose his left forearm. Allen's eyes caught the ink, faded, sun-worn, but precise. A trident, not the commercial kind, the original SEAL insignia embedded in a sniper qualification ring flanked by hash marks denoting tours that no longer existed in official records. Allen blinked. His father had told him once quietly that real SEALs never bragged, that the ones who survived usually stayed quiet because they had no reason to explain what they did. Allen stood up from his desk, stepped into the hallway, and placed a call to a family friend stationed at the Pentagon. He didn't know what he was asking exactly, just that something felt wrong. He gave a description, the tattoo, the lack of ID. The man on the other end of the line, SEAL sniper. Early Jenner, real as it gets. Another pause. Then, hold tight. Don't let the case proceed. I'll take care of it. Allen returned to the courtroom and sat down, pulse racing. No one noticed. The judge resumed the hearing. The public defender fumbled through a request for leniency. The prosecutor mumbled about store policies and respecting authority. Walter said nothing. Then, at exactly 9:43 a.m., the doors opened. 2 uniformed aides stepped in first, clearing a path. And behind them, walking with purpose, was a man whose presence silenced the entire room. A 4-star general in full dress uniform, ribbons gleaming, posture rigid, eyes fixed straight ahead. He stopped at the bar, turned to the judge, and said, clearly, "Your Honor, I request the floor." The judge looked up, confused. It took him a moment to fully register what he was seeing. The courtroom wasn't used to visitors like this, let alone a full general, flanked by aides, wearing service ribbons that reached the shoulder seam. The prosecutor's mouth hung slightly open. The public defender slowly closed the folder in front of him. Even the arresting officers straightened, instinctively their smirks evaporating. "State your name for the record," the judge said, more out of reflex than protocol. "General Marcus Weller, United States Army, retired," the man answered. "I'm here on behalf of the defendant." Walter didn't move. He hadn't lifted his head. His eyes stayed on the floor. Weller turned slightly toward him, then back to the bench. "The man you have in custody is Staff Chief Walter Briggs, retired United States Navy SEAL, SEAL Team 2, Sniper, Unit. Active from 1971 to 2002. Confirmed operations in Somalia, Bosnia, classified recon in Iraq during pre-invasion, and forward overwatch in Operation Anaconda. He is the recipient of the Navy Cross, Silver Star, and Joint Service Combination with Vice. He is also one of the last living original generation SEAL snipers still walking. You have him cuffed for charging his phone." The silence was complete. Weller walked to the defense table, stopping directly in front of Walter. His tone shifted not for drama, but for respect. "Chief Briggs," he said clearly. "Sir, you once saved my brother in Kandahar. Pulled him from a burning Humvee under sniper fire. You were wounded and refused medevac. I've waited 15 years to shake your hand." Walter slowly looked up. His eyes didn't soften. He didn't nod. He simply stared for a long moment, then said flatly, "He made it." Weller's voice cracked. "He did. Thanks to you." The judge sat back, in his chair, clearly shaken. "I had no idea." "That's the point," Weller interrupted, calm but firm. "Men like him don't announce who they are. They don't post about their service. They don't wear their medals to court. They come home and they disappear because everything they did is burned into them already. But when they're treated like criminals for sitting quietly on a sidewalk, something is broken." He turned to the Baif. "Remove the cuffs." The Baif hesitated. That wasn't a request. The cuffs came off. Walter rubbed his wrist slowly without looking at anyone. "I want all charges dropped immediately," Weller said, "and I want this man's name cleared, sealed, and protected." The judge nodded. "Yes, of course. All charges dismissed, expuned." One of the officers tried to speak, but Weller cut him off without raising his voice. "Next time you put your hands on someone, ask who they are first." Walter stood. He didn't thank anyone. He didn't need to. He picked up his jacket, folded it over one arm, and began walking toward the door. Weller followed, stopping just before Walter exited. He leaned in and said quietly, "The silence you've lived in all these years, it mattered. Even when the rest of the world forgot, we didn't." Walter didn't respond. But for the first time since the hearing began, his face changed just slightly. A half-inch movement in the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but something close. Then he walked out. Walter didn't return home right away. He drove past his street, past the gas station where the clerk always looked through him, past the American Legion post he never entered. He parked at the edge of the local veteran cemetery and sat with the engine running, staring out the windshield. In the glove box was the coin General Weller had pressed into his hand before they parted. An old challenge coin, heavy with weight and silence. On the back, etched deep into the metal, were 4 words. "Your silence was never wasted." He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He just sat there letting it all sink in. He hadn't wanted recognition. He still didn't. But something in the courtroom had shifted more than just public perception. It had cracked the wall he'd built inside his chest. The world hadn't remembered him, but someone had. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. Later that week, word had spread. Not viral, not loud, just quietly among the right people. At the SEAL training compound 2 states over, instructors referenced the story without names, using it to remind recruits that not all heroes wear medals in public and not all legends are written in textbooks. At the local VFW hall, a framed photo appeared near the bar. A grainy black and white picture of a sniper team in a mountain pass with a handwritten note beneath it. "He never asked to be known, so we won't name him, but we remember." At the county courthouse, the staff didn't speak of the day the general walked in, but those who were there never forgot it. The judge grew quieter in his rulings. The prosecutor started looking twice at every name he processed. Even the arresting officer, young, proud, humiliated, requested reassignment not long after. And Alan, the clerk who had made the call, he never told anyone what pushed him to do it. But a week later, a package arrived at his apartment with no return address. Inside was a book, SEAL Team History, declassified Volume 1, and tucked inside the front cover was a folded sheet of paper. It wasn't signed. It simply read, "You looked closer. Most don't. That matters." As for Walter, he resumed his routines. Same coffee, same truck, same quiet walks at sunrise. But those who passed him noticed something had changed. He stood a little straighter, not prouder, just steadier, less like a shadow, more like a man willing to be seen again. And once a month, without fail, he returned to the small courtroom not to watch, not to relive, but to sit on the back bench, anonymous among the crowd, listening, observing. Not because he wanted to relive what happened, but because, maybe, just maybe, someone else might need what he'd once been denied. A second look. He never wanted a courtroom full of silence. Never wanted a general to walk through a door to defend him. All Walter Briggs ever wanted was peace. To be left alone. To carry the weight he'd earned without having to prove it to anyone. But when the world forgets what a hero looks like, sometimes it takes one moment, one gesture to remind everyone. He didn't need a medal pinned on his chest or his name in the paper. He didn't ask for that. All he needed was to know that after everything he gave, someone still saw him. And sometimes that's all any of them want. Because not all warriors speak. Some serve in silence. And when they come home, most just want to live quietly with the dignity they never demanded and the respect they never asked for. So if you ever pass a man like Walter on a bench in a waiting room, maybe even in a courtroom, look again, because you might be looking at someone who changed the course of history and never said a word about it. Now, I ask you, have you ever met someone like Walter Briggs? Someone who served, never told their story, and carried it all alone? Say their name in the comments. Share who they were. Let others know the stories we were never meant to forget. Because here at the Human Stories, we believe the most powerful stories don't shout, they wait. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe, share, and help us keep these voices alive. And the next time you see a quiet man standing alone, don't just walk past. You might be standing next to someone who saved the world and never told a soul.